This is Economics for Entrepreneurs, the podcast where we apply the principles of economics to help you make the best decisions for your life and business. Here's your host, Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. At Economics for Entrepreneurs, we're big fans of entrepreneurship as the route to a fulfilling life of self-reliance. One of the major opportunities in entrepreneurship, and one of the keys to success, is purposeful specialization based on unique knowledge. Every business should strive to achieve uniqueness, offering a unique and unparalleled service to a highly selective group of customers who assign a high value to the offering because of their special business situation. We're all unique individuals, and we're all capable of harnessing our unique creativity in ways that no one else can match. The route to this uniqueness is often specialized knowledge, gathering more and more knowledge over time in an area of customer need so that you become the expert in applying that knowledge for the customer's benefit. Today we're talking with Bob Luddy, founder and CEO of CaptiveAire Systems. CaptiveAire specializes in the commercial kitchen ventilation business. That includes fans, HVAC, electrical controls, fire suppression systems, and a vast array of exhaust hoods, grease ducts, and accessories. CaptiveAire was founded in 1976 and is now the largest manufacturer of commercial kitchen ventilation in North America. Its customer list has expanded from its first individual restaurant to a long list of individual restaurants, to large restaurant chains, and to military and school installations. The business now does hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues, and over the years it has been identified as one of the fastest growing businesses in America by Inc. 500, identified as a best-in-class business by its customers, and has secured several patents for innovation in process and design. Steered by Bob, it has ascended to a position of recognized leadership in its field. CaptiveAire is a business that identified a niche that is both small and highly important, and allows for significant and continuous beneficial innovation. So today we're talking to the founder to get the full story, to hear some insights we can all use, and soak up the spirit of a successful entrepreneur. Bob, hello.
How are you today, Hunter?
Good. Very nice to talk to you, Bob, and great of you to join Economics for Entrepreneurs.
It's a delight to be with you today.
So, Bob, you're one of the great and exemplary entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of our listeners who are going to have questions about the entrepreneurial mindset and attitude and how you made the decision to be an entrepreneur, and we'll definitely explore that. But let's do so from within the context of your business, CaptiveAire. And tell us a little bit about the origin story, how you conceived of the business, how you got started, and how you first started to gather some momentum.
When I moved to North Carolina, I got a job selling fire suppression systems to restaurants. And after a couple of years, I decided rather suddenly to start my own business doing essentially the same thing, selling and installing fire suppression systems. And as the business got underway, we had some requests in installing ventilation systems. So within about the first 6 months, we were installing fire systems and ventilation systems. And I began to learn more about the nature of kitchen ventilation systems and realized somewhat early on that while the fire suppression business had potential, the kitchen ventilation business was an international business that we potentially could compete in. And it took some time, but gradually we morphed over in about year 9 when exclusively selling and making commercial kitchen ventilation systems.
So in the modern parlance of Silicon Valley, they'd call that a pivot from fire suppression to ventilation systems, but it sounds more like a gradual transition. Is that right?
It was much more of a transition, and it took a long time because we had to learn about kitchen ventilation. I had very little capital, so it's kind of a classic garage startup. And the fact that it took longer also has some value because we had to learn from the ground up. We had to make things work. We had to be very resourceful. And all those things in the longer term are important to the future growth of the company.
And was there a point then, Bob, where you knew that the business was going to be successful, some kind of a tipping point where you switched from that learning, being unsure, gradual improvement to getting to be more confident of where you were going?
I think the tipping point was in year 9, 1985, when we essentially had a normal banking relationship. First Union Bank gave us a relationship and a loan. And at that point, I thought we had reached a measure of stability. Didn't mean we had it made. I think it's also indicative that it takes a lot longer to develop a great business than what we think or what we would like it to be. But that was a very important key date.
Well, it's a great piece of learning, too, to be patient and resolute. Year 9 is, in today's terms, that feels like it was exercising great patience.
No doubt. And I always look back and say, could have we done it quicker? And maybe if we went out and sought capital, but that might have meant giving up part of the business. And the learning curve for all of us takes longer than we would like to think, especially if we want to reach very high levels of perfection.
I want to dig down a little bit into the role of specialization in your success and in entrepreneurial success generally. You chose to serve the restaurant industry, and you selected the kitchen ventilation problem as the one you were going to solve for your customers, even though you didn't start there. Can you tell us a little bit about how the specialization opportunity began to emerge for you and how it's sharpened over time, and how important do you think specialization is to success?
I think specialization is critically important. Individuals call themselves serial entrepreneurs. I wonder about them because it seems like they never spend enough time to be the best at any particular business they're engaged in. So the transition from fire suppression to kitchen ventilation is always perilous. But when we initially started with fire suppression, I wanted to be the best provider, installer, and service agent for that product. And indeed, we were. Within a few years, within about 3 years of founding, we were the best. In terms of kitchen ventilation, by the time we got to the end of the 1980s, we were not all that well known, but we were producing a lot of hoods at a very good price, very good quality, and fast lead times. So I was able to identify weaknesses in the market, namely lead times, price, performance, service levels, that allowed us to grow very quickly once we were able to harness the knowledge of knowing how to do it.
So that really sharpens the lesson, I think, being the best in your specialization. That's the target.
Yeah, I think trying to be all things to all people, and even within the products that we currently produce, we try to be highly standardized. And there's a tendency in wanting to get sales that you'll say anything and do anything to get the sale, but then you're left to execute on that sale. So what we've tried to do is to standardize and get everybody essentially to buy the same product within a pretty tight range so that we could maintain quality, drive down costs, deliver quickly. And if I noted over the last 20 years, the companies in our industry that tried to be all things to all people mostly have all gone out of business. So this area of specialization is a basic economic concept, which I think is very critical to entrepreneurs.
And how does that apply in your middle period and your most recent period of CaptiveAire? Bob, you've started to become a market leader. You're the innovation leader. You're the service leader. You stress service very much in your business, I know. and you've made some acquisitions. You've expanded your product line. So what are the key learnings from that growth stage that still keeps you within that specialization?
I think the key is that I decided early on that we should provide an integrated system. When we started, we could provide the fire suppression system in the hood, but there was maybe 10 important components to a kitchen ventilation system. So the goal was over time to be able to provide all of those technologies. That took a very long time. And one thing that we learned in the process, we've never been able to rely on a supplier or a subcontractor for a major product group. So for example, we need fans. Ultimately, it took until 2001 where we were able to buy a small fan company and be in the fan business. Prior to that, we were never satisfied with the fans we could buy in the marketplace. So while our product line became more diverse, that diversity always served the integration of a commercial kitchen ventilation system. And the diversity helped us drive sales and improve our technology. And now we are the dominant integrator of commercial kitchen ventilation systems in North America.
And maybe that's another lesson of economics, Bob, that an entrepreneur in economic terms is a systems thinker, which sounds like maybe it's a bit intimidating, but from what you said, it's about analyzing all of the elements of a business that you can identify to provide an integrated service to your customers. Is that how you think about systems thinking?
Yeah, very oftentimes I refer to us as a system integrator. So think about if you bought a car today and it had everything but the air conditioner. And they said, well, the air conditioner is by others. That would sound pretty stupid to you.
Right.
It would be ridiculous in modern parlance. But in many products, companies are very specialized and they provide a little piece of the solution. But pretty much in any industry, most all buyers or users want a fully integrated, complete solution. So if you buy a home, you want to walk in and they call it turnkey, turn the key, walk in and it's done. If you buy a car, the same thing. If you buy a cell phone. So the future big business is about integration. Now, defining a strategy of what that integration is going to be, what the standards are going to be, is the job of the entrepreneur. And it requires a lot of thought. Steve Jobs made the comment that no focus group ever asked for the iPhone.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So in his case, and in our case, we visualize, based on what we know about the users, what would please them, what would solve their problems, and then we produce those products. But they're not going to come from a focus group. And while users and customers can identify their problems, they don't know the solutions. They rely on the entrepreneur to provide those solutions.
Yeah, that's the old Henry Ford story. Is if I ask consumers what they wanted, they say faster horses.
That's very simple.
Yeah. So in your excellent book, Entrepreneurial Life, Bob, you talk about the chronology of CaptiveAire, and then you set out some principles for entrepreneurs in the second half of the book, which was tremendously educational. And let's touch on just a few of them. One of them is about decision making. And just as an example of that, there was one that stood out to me when CaptiveAire changed the metal alloy that was the industry standard that was used for sheet metal in your industry. And that was a tremendous innovation because it was a change that improved the economics of your industry. But there were lots of people who said, "Hey, you can't do that. You're going to have a problem because the industry doesn't want change." So tell us a little bit about that story and the lessons to be drawn from it about bold and courageous decision making.
Well, in 1988, the price of stainless steel was rising. And so I decided, this was actually back to the Christmas of '87, that I was going to lightweight the hoods. So typically hoods were made of 16 and 18 gauge stainless steel 304 type. So I started working on this project to reduce the hoods to 18 and 20 gauge. And by sometime in March, after about 3 months, we made our prototypes. We were ready to go to production. And the product was actually quite good, even though the perception was if it wasn't made out of heavy metal, it wouldn't be any good. But it's purely a perception. It wasn't reality. And as we began to produce these lightweighted hoods, we now saved approximately 20% of the weight in the hood and 20% of the material cost. So I started thinking, if we were starting today to produce commercial kitchen ventilation hoods, what type of metal would be recommended? So I called the steel mill and said, here's the problem. Tell me what, if we started today, would be the best metal to make hoods at the best price. And they recommended a European blend called 430, not very common in the US, but it was made in Mexico. So we began to switch over to 430 metal. And within industries, so many things are sacrosanct. You dare not challenge any of these things, or you will be pushed out of existence. So the next 3 or 4 years of pushing this new standard were very difficult. We had a lot of criticism, pushback from customers. But here's the end game. From '88 to 2003, most all of our competitors said that our standard was no good and it wouldn't be sustainable, it wouldn't last. In 2003, the kitchen ventilation industry capitulated and began to use the 430 metal. By somewhere around 2008, the entire food service industry was using 430 metal where they could to make commercial equipment. So it gives you an idea that entrepreneurs are early stage pioneers. They have to be courageous. They have to be able to withstand withering criticism. But as I point out, they also have to be right or they're going to be out of business.
It also shows, I think, that innovation can be found in all parts of the supply chain. You're deep in the capital structure there. You're sourcing a different kind of metal. So it's kind of innovation that consumers might not notice. So there's lots of room for innovation in different places. And you didn't have to invent that metal. You found it and were able to transfer it from another source, from Europe. You were innovating rather than inventing. Is that right?
Yeah, I think successful entrepreneurs are very good at seeking knowledge and connecting the dots. As you may know, Israel Kirzner called it alertness. Entrepreneurs are alert to things happening in the market or knowledge that most individuals are not paying attention to. The other salient point, I think, is that all innovation is ephemeral. It's short-lived. So entrepreneurs have to be thinking in terms of constant innovation, change, Kaizen, improvement. And most individuals want to maintain the status quo. And over time, the status quo goes away. It's no longer used. And that's why you see businesses constantly going out of business over a period of time. Because while they recognize the dynamics of the market, sometimes they fail to realize those dynamics are going to impact them personally and their businesses.
And there are two things that you say in the book about decision making in that context, Bob, where you've got to move fast and take on that change. You say that decisions have to be made sometimes without all the information. And I was reading Jeff Bezos's latest quarterly report the other day, and he talks about making decisions with 70% of the available information. You'd like more, but you've got to move fast. And his other part of that was high velocity decision making. Make the decision fast, And then you add one more thing in the book, which is always go back and reevaluate those decisions and see what you learned as a result. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and the reevaluation, Dr. Bill Peterson, Austrian economist, was my mentor. And he often stated, none of us get it all right. So both in real-time decisions we're going to make today and decisions that we've made in the past, they need to be under review. And that review is important because we're also taking in new information. So the decision we made last year or a month ago, we might make differently based on new information. If you go back to Jeff Bezos' comment, entrepreneurs are darn lucky if they have 70% of the information.
Yeah.
Very often we have to make decisions on a small amount of the information, but we're making them in a context of a larger amount of information and a small amount of information about a particular decision. Bureaucrats want all the information and then they want a lot of time to review it. That's not a luxury that you have in the entrepreneurial world. So this idea of high velocity, accurate decision making, and I also talk about the fact that if we make it wrong, we apologize, we make amends, and we fix it. We don't pretend that we always make the right decisions. And I think most Americans respect that. If you make a decision or it could have been done a better way and you say, sorry, we made that one wrong, here's what we're going to do about it, most everybody's okay with that. If you stick by a bad decision, nobody's okay with that.
Another principle that emerges from that, I think, in your book, Bob, is to stress execution, not process, and to measure everything in terms of real outcomes. So what you just talked about in terms of customer honesty, that's a real outcome, and you face up to it and you fix it, as opposed to following the process because that's how it's written down. So tell our listeners a little bit about being an execution-first company and how that impacts the way that you run the business and manage it and lead.
One comment first on, companies talk about business plans, strategic plans, and in the entrepreneurial world, I don't think we do that. What I do is to have a strategic vision. So we're setting targets for product, for sales, for earnings, etc. Those are aspirational targets. At the same time, we don't pretend that we know how to get there, but we've set a goal and we're using all of our efforts to get there. There's a book written called Execution by Lawrence Bossidy, former GE and CEO of Honeywell.
Yep.
And Bossidy says, we tend to know our business, but do we execute well? And most of the decisions or the things that we get wrong are often a failure to execute. So in my world, I learned from my mother this thing that she would tell us often, that tomorrow never comes.
Yep.
Do it today, in other words. So I'm the type of person, I try to develop our team. We're doing it now. We're doing it today. We're not long-term planners, but we have a long-term vision. So the things we're doing today fall within that vision. But you can't plan out the next 5 years. You're lucky if you can plan out the day or a week, much less 5 years. So the stressing of execution, did you get it done today, is critical. And customers want it done now. Think of FedEx. They want that letter tomorrow. They don't want you to say, well, later in the week, I'll get to it and send it to you. Those days are gone. Everything in the modern world is close to real time.
In economic parlance, they say that the future is unpredictable, which is execution first recognizes that, right?
Absolutely does. And we consider it a high value both in individuals that work here, suppliers that take care of us. We don't care how they get the metal to us or what happened during the day. We just know, regardless of what happened, you need to make the delivery, the quality needs to be right. You need to do the service. because everybody in the system is relying on that execution.
The other real outcome that you talk about a lot in the book, and I've heard you talk about it in other venues as well, Bob, is the importance of profit. And that sounds pretty basic, but a lot of business talk these days tends to look at different metrics and dashboards and talk about corporate social responsibility and stakeholders and those kinds of things. But you say that a focus on profit and maybe profits first derivatives like profit per product or profit per installation is the most important metric. So please tell us a little bit about your thinking on the role of profit and the right attitude towards profit.
Well, the purpose of a business is to make profit in a fair and moral way. And by doing that, everybody benefits. My attitude, this idea of stakeholder, as soon as you talk about stakeholders, is everybody in the world a stakeholder in every single business? Obviously, that's an untenable idea. But the term stakeholder tends to imply that concept. If a business doesn't make profits, there is no business, there are no employees, there's no new technology. So I have two themes. One is we have to make a profit every month and we have to cash flow, because failing to do that, there is no business. The exception would be companies that are financed through venture capital, and that's a different type of model. But for most businesses, they have to be churning a profit and cash flow. Now, in terms of longer term profit, I think very long term. So I'll give you an example. We are saddled with very severe metal tariffs currently, about 25%. If I went to our customers and said, well, we have these horrendous tariffs, and by the way, you're going to pay for them, it's not going to be well received. So what we do is try to say, okay, we have a hardship. How are we going to deal with that? And as a result, our customers look at CaptiveAire and say, well, there's a company that cares about us. They're dealing with problems that we don't want to deal with, and they're figuring how to be more efficient. So we're still making a profit, we'll just make less profit. And I use it as an opportunity to become more efficient, not to punish our customers. If you read most major businesses, they'll say, yeah, we have this horrendous problem. And by the way, we've passed it along to our customers. I can tell you it's not well received by your customers. Mm-hmm. So very short term, you have to make a profit, you have to cash flow. But in the longer term, you have more discretion. You don't have to make the maximum profit at all times. And implied in this whole thing is moral and fair treatment of customers, employees, suppliers, and anybody else that we deal with.
I noticed that in the preface to your book, one of your reviewers talked about the strong moral values of the entrepreneur, which are values that you project, and values are important in business. So just expand on that a little bit, Bob, the moral values of the entrepreneur and the results of that morality.
Well, think about this. When we do business, if we walk into a hamburger restaurant, we are totally trusting that restaurant that we're not going to get sick and we're not going to die. So in any business transaction, there's a very high level of trust. And entrepreneurs who foster that trust are going to be highly valued, versus, as we read every day in the Wall Street Journal, sexual harassment, financial hanky-panky. People are not going to trust those individuals and those businesses, and it severely impacts them in the long term. So trust and integrity are cornerstones of a business, and they actually make life fairly simple. You don't have to worry about the IRS. You don't have to worry about sneaky deals that somebody pulled somewhere. You do things fairly honestly, morally. You gain the respect of your employees, suppliers, and your customers, and you gain their long-term trust, which means they're going to stick with you over the long haul, which is imperative if you're going to grow a big business.
Let's switch attention a little bit, Bob, to some of the personal and individual and intangible attributes of entrepreneurs. And you talked about some tough decisions you have to make. In the book, you talk about some tough times and difficult challenges. And perhaps you can talk a little bit about that experience. You say that the entrepreneur has to be a very special kind of person to take on the burden of some of those tough times and difficult moments, and perhaps you can use a couple of them to illustrate what you mean.
Yeah, there's a book written about the hard thing about hard things, written by a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, and essentially says what we do are the hard things. So I think one of the things from just to maintain a good attitude, if the entrepreneur knows that the hard decisions are going to come to them, and they're going to have to make them fairly adroitly and quickly to succeed, life gets a little bit easier. There's nothing easy about being an entrepreneur, and it's even more difficult when you're a small company, small entrepreneur, because there's so many things going against you. So for entrepreneurs who are not willing to make hard decisions, they're probably not going to make it. I cited in the book 1980 when we couldn't make payroll. It was a major wake-up call because things weren't going as well as I thought they were at the time. And as a result, we laid some people off. We re-looked at the business and we came out stronger. We hit another low point several years later in 1982. We were losing money in February of 82. And I decided to put my full efforts to make sure that we would never lose money again. By June of that year, we were profitable and never had a losing month thereafter. So I think it demonstrates that every business needs a continued review of finances and understanding of the numbers. And we tend to become engaged in all aspects of the business. But without cash flow and profits, that business does not exist.
One of the elements there then is the individual and personal attributes and traits that make for an entrepreneur. And one of the approaches to entrepreneurship tells people to ask the question at the outset, who am I? What are my personal traits and values, and will they make me an entrepreneur? And I know I've written about empathy and grit and adaptiveness, but maybe those are too theoretical and they don't properly describe the real world of hard work and commitment and hard things. So how would you describe the type of personality who can voluntarily put themselves through so many challenges for such an such an extended period of time, as you say in the book? You say that entrepreneurs think and act differently from other people. So what words would you use to describe the personality of the entrepreneur?
I think brutal determination, because there are times that the only thing you really have going for you have people within your own company that are against you, you have challenges with customers, suppliers, etc. Sometimes the only thing you have going for yourself is your own personal grit and determination that we are going to succeed and we are going to find the ways and means, whatever it takes to succeed. I just told our employees today at a small Christmas luncheon that we want to double our sales over the next 5 years. And that just doesn't mean getting more sales. It means we have to change everything about the way we do business. From our product to our manufacturing to how we deal with customers to gaining new technologies. That requires continuous change, which is hard, and most people do not like it. So the entrepreneur has to be willing to say, these are the things that we must do to continue to grow. And you can be empathetic in that process, but they must be done. They're non-negotiable. We are going to do these things. And I told employees, I can remember back in the early 80s saying, we're going to move forward as a company. You may choose not to move forward with us, but that's not going to impact my vision of continuously moving forward. Thankfully, we have a very high retention rate. And I think by painting the vision and by letting them know it's going to be good, but it's going to be hard. And I think if we get that in our head, it's not going to be easy, it's going to be hard, and I'm going to do the hard things correctly to get to where we want to go to. As soon as you get committees and you become afraid of making hard decisions, you end up stalling, and then a more aggressive competitor essentially can take your business. So brute determination, perseverance, constantly reviewing your vision and the ways and means to fulfill that vision.
Well, talking about brutal determination, you've turned your entrepreneurial genius to education through, among other institutions, Thales Academy, which you founded for pre-K through 12 education. And education is notoriously difficult to reform and change, although obviously tremendously important. Can you say a little bit about the entrepreneurial principles you're applying to educational reform and change, Bob?
Yeah, I was very fortunate that I was able to go to Catholic school at no charge, K-12, was first to 12. So I realized the value of a good education. And it somewhat broke my heart to see many young people who would never really be able to unlock the American way because of a lack of education, mentorship, etc. So in '98, I decided to open a public charter school. And this was a prime example where people would say, well, that's not a good idea. Nobody's going to go to your charter school. Our schools are great. And this is where an entrepreneur stands up and says, no, your schools are not great. That's why I'm doing this. And I'm going to prove to you they're not great. And I'm also going to prove to you there's a better way of doing things. You're certainly exactly right that the educational establishment is very static. They hate change, and they think they're doing amazing. And in the modern market, nobody's doing amazing for very long. In the first year when we opened the public charter school, it was completely filled, and by the second year, we had a waiting list. So it's the same example where an entrepreneur has a different vision than the status quo. And then the question is, can they figure out the right vision, and can they execute the plan? The basic management and entrepreneurial principles of running a school are no different than running a business.
So would you say that the personal experience you're having while you're building Thales Academy is the same as building CaptiveAire, or is it different in some way, and if so, how?
I think it's mostly the same. For example, in our K-12 Thales Academies, we don't require teacher licenses, but what we do require is highly qualified. So we have to sell that idea to the parents that highly qualified is better than licensed. We don't have accreditation because, number one, accreditation is not needed. And secondly, it impedes the entrepreneurial plan because it's going to require you to do things you don't want to do and shouldn't do. And it's going to restrict innovation and new ways of approaching problems. Class size, all these things that are embedded from the propaganda of the educational system, we have to disabuse parents. So once they witnessed that we could get our students into top-notch colleges, that they were doing extremely well, that character development and discipline were important to that process, we began to win converts. But the process is similar. You have to sell whoever your customers are and associates on your ideas. And that's the primary mission of the entrepreneur.
Well, there's so much that entrepreneurs can learn from you, Bob, and I hope you'll come back and talk to us in the future and we can discuss some more. But let's wrap up with thinking about the future. There's a lot of discussion about how the future of work and the role of humans is going to be different as artificial intelligence and other kinds of automation and machine learning take over. Do you have any thoughts about approaching entrepreneurship in the future?
I do. If you think about it, I mean, I have technology on my desk that provides a dashboard, and all the information that maybe an army of people provided in the past. But what will never change is the human's ability to take in information and know how to proceed and execute. So I view all this technology as elevating the human being to a higher level. That higher level will require more education, more commitment to the future. But it's a vast improvement. If we have a machine in the factory that makes a product without touching it, the employee is safer, they have a higher quality job, and they're paid more money. So the future with technology simply supports humans because we have the brain that allows us to sort it out and make sense of it and make decisions that computers will never be able to make. So if we look to the future as vastly better than the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, we'll have better jobs, more interesting, safer, we'll be able to work longer, and it'll be a much more exciting career than individuals had in the past.
Well, Bob, thank you very much for your time and insights today. People can find your business at CaptiveAire.com. That's CaptiveAire, CaptiveAire.com. And your school, do you pronounce it Thales? Is that how I say it?
It's Thales.
Thales Academy. That's THALES Academy.org. There's also thalescollege.org. And your book, which I enjoyed so much, Entrepreneurial Life, is available on Amazon.com. So, Bob, thank you very much. And I do hope you'll come back and talk to us again in the future.
Hunter, it was a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. And that's it, everybody, for today at Economics for Entrepreneurs. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week when we'll continue to explore the economic principles that can help you make smarter business decisions and grow your business. Thank you.
Economics for Entrepreneurs is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit Mises.org. That's MISES.org. For more from Hunter Hastings, check out hunterhastings.com.